Hey, great to have you here. So we're back today with another horror review video, and today we are going to be taking a look at the movie Sinister. This is one that I watched, I think a couple years ago at this point in time. More or less enjoyed the movie and I figured I'd give it another rewatch for today. And really starring Ethan Hawke in this one. I think the guy who plays one of the professors is awfully familiar as well. I think I've seen him in some other things, but Ethan Hawke is really the lead man in this movie, and really enjoy him as an actor, so figured I'd give this one another rewatch. So it really starts off with this Super 8 film footage of this family who's hanging from a tree. So really just jumps right in with the veracity as far as the content of the movie itself. And you just see them hanging there, and it kind of gives the backdrop of the plot of the movie without giving away too much of the story at that point in time. Then we cut to present time where we have the family moving in. So Ethan Hawke's family is now moving into this house, and he has 2 kids, a daughter and a son, and his wife there. And there's also cops there that are greeting him as he's moving in, and it seems like he has a bit of a reputation. We get a little bit of backstory that he is an author, and he has had kind of mixed success previously with writing novels on various topics, some which involve police force, so that's why they're a little bit mixed on him. There's one cop in particular who really doesn't like him, and there's one cop in particular who really does like him. So both sides of the spectrum there. We have some other scenes like the daughter painting on the walls, so that's kind of giving her backstory as far as things that she enjoys, so she's like painting her walls. We have the sheriff, who the one who doesn't like him, talk to him for a little bit. Some of this felt a little bit of a stretch because it seems like the sheriff has read all of his books and knows this guy extremely well. And it's a little bit skewed to think this guy's a big reader. Maybe he is, but the fact that he read all of his books but then doesn't like him, he like hates Ethan Hawke's character, but he's read all of his books. I feel like, for me personally, if there's an author I don't like, I'm not going to read all of their books, so a little bit strange with him being invested in him without actually liking him. We find out that the father figure here, Ethan Hawke, is writing about a missing girl situation, and we have a quote at the beginning where his wife's talking to him, and she seems to be partially involved in his life, but not heavily involved, and she says, "Hey, we didn't move a few houses down from a crime scene, did we?" And right there, you know, when his answer is, "No, of course not." I feel like right away I'm like, they live at the crime scene house. He avoided answering the question incorrectly because they didn't move a few houses down. They moved right at the house. So kind of funny there, and you kind of know what's going on right away, which they're not trying to hide too much there. With that, I'm kind of like, why would you move in directly to that house? Obviously, it's going to be maybe a house that's really sold for cheap, so that could be an explanation that we do get later on in the film. He winds up exploring the house. He finds this box of film in the attic, which is really the core component of the movie itself. Get a little bit more backstory as far as him chasing success that he once had in his prior book that he wrote, and his wife doesn't really seem to believe in him too much. It feels like they have a little bit of a shaky marriage. And then we fast forward a little bit of time to the evening where the father's watching the film that was in the attic. We see that intro scene again where the family's hanging, so he's seeing this live again. So we recapture that introduction film, and he's taking notes. He's like, who filmed this? Where's Stephanie, who's the girl that is missing? So apparently the 4 people hanging were all dead, and the daughter has been missing, is kind of the story, the backdrop of this house. We also have some scenes that are kind of trying to build suspense where his daughter wakes up and he like guides her to the bathroom and goes forward with that. He then watches some more films and sees another killing. This one with the family tied up in a car and the car set on fire. So we have 2 separate families that we've seen killed at this point in time. He's going to call the police to report this information, it sounds like. But then he hangs up when he looks at his books, and I'm not sure if maybe he's afraid of the cops not being on his side. It's probably more so I think he wants to have success. So he looks at his book on his shelf. I think it's called like Kentucky Blood or something along those lines. But he looks at the books and he's like thinking in his head, I'm going to control this myself. I'm going to take care of it. So I think that's reasonable enough just because of, as I mentioned too, the cops probably aren't going to be overly on his side. And he's really wondering, why was this box left behind when everything else was taken from the house but this specific box? He then finds his son in a box who's like upside down. He's doing like an exorcist thing where he's like making creepy noises and upside down. It sounds like the son gets night terrors, so they're not overly alarmed by this behavior. And then we fast forward to the next day where he's watching another film during the day, and we see another family, a third family, drowned in a pool. And we see this monster also in the film as well. And then immediately the film set, the Super 8 sets on fire. Then he researches, how do I put this back together? Is able to do that and fix the footage. And then he's trying to find that same creature again, and he can't see him anywhere. We fast forward to the son coming home from school, and apparently he drew a picture on the whiteboard with like permanent marker of the hanging scene. So he's drawing this at school. So they're getting some backdrop of what happened in the house, kind of subliminally. It's mentioned maybe he gets the feedback from the kids at school, but you don't know how much of it is that and how much of it could be just the house having an impact on him because he knew exactly what to draw. On top of that, I feel like, I know kids can be bullies, but knowing the history of the house and knowing the father's writing career, it felt like those would be stretches to happen. So I don't know how much of that was just to be assumed or how much of that actually happened. I feel like kids can be mean and they may have some stories from the town, but it felt like they had a lot of information on the house and the main lead, Ethan Hawke. Then we watch another film. So this is our fourth film at this point, and the family is tied down and their throats are slit. So various ways these families are killed off, and then we see he's doing a little bit of detective work where he's like looking at the footage and like changing settings on his computer to enhance the image a little bit better. He sees an image mentioning St. Louis, so then he Googles St. Louis with those murders, and he finds out a little bit of information there. And then the lights shut off, and he hears footsteps in the attic. He goes up there, you see the box moving around, you're like, okay, there's clearly gonna be like a little animal in here. It surprised me a bit, it was a snake. I thought it was gonna be like, I don't know, a squirrel or something. And sees that, and then he sees in the box top all these drawings of the deaths. So he sees like the hanging and the other ones I mentioned, and you see a Mr. Boogie mentioned, who's kind of like off scene watching the thing. This scene was a little bit strange. I feel like when the lights all went out, his first inclination should be, hey, let's get the power back up, but instead he just goes straight up to the attic on his own. Maybe you want to say he's adventurous or just foolish. But apparently the whole power went out in the neighborhood when the cops come, they mention that. But he goes up and tries to resolve it himself. He winds up falling through the floor in the attic and coming down, and they're like taking care of him. He's like, no, I'm fine, don't worry about it. And the cop that really liked him winds up showing up and mentions, oh yeah, I really love Kentucky Blood. Can I get your autograph? And he gives him a copy of the book that he has at his own house. And he is really trying to get in good with, it's kind of funny, their relationship. He's trying to get in good with the author. He likes his stuff. And he's like, hey, I know you always mention these credits to other people in your investigations. I could be your officer so-and-so and really help you crack these cases. So he agrees to do that. And he gives him the research to look into the murders that he's seen before, the St. Louis one. And then the other one, he just gives details on what happened. He doesn't describe where it's at because he doesn't know where it's at that point in time. Then we cut to just some more backstory of him watching an old interview where he speaks about doing this for justice. So he wrote his book and he's just really doing this to do good in the world essentially. But now it seems like he's seeking fame and money. So it's kind of, I think, pointing that out where he says, no, I'm doing this solely for justice. He says something like, I would cut off my hands before I would do this for money and fame. And then you see him kind of watching himself say that, and you realize maybe he's changed his tune a little bit. He really wants that money and fame once again, so maybe his perspective's changed, or maybe all along this is what he really wanted, and it's just becoming more prominent at this point in time. We then see Bagul in a hanging video, and then another video. So then he prints off the face, puts it on his board, so he has like your typical detective board where he's got the strings going everywhere. He prints that and puts that up on the board. We see him there. And then we have the cop wind up calling and mentioning, hey, yeah, I looked into your St. Louis murder. There was also one. The other one was in Sacramento. So these two different families were impacted. And the St. Louis family, he finds out when he hears the address number, is the family that moved into the house that he's currently living in. So the family that lived there moved here and died in this house. And I feel like from there, I kind of picked up on where they were going, even upon first watch was, okay, that means probably the one in St. Louis came from another. So, and you kind of think, oh, this is going to want to maybe recycling, which it does. So either way, it's still a good story, even if it's somewhat expected at this point in time. And then we cut to him doing more research, and they do some cool cinematography here where they have Bagul turn and look at him. So there's a picture of it frozen on the screen, and he just turns, then he turns back before he like sees him do it. So kind of a cool cinematography effect there. And then we see a video of Ethan Hawke where he's like up there looking around, and you see these little hands grabbing him, which we obviously later find out those are the kids that are doing so, but he just sees these hands and he's just kind of freaked out by the whole situation. At night, eventually, the Super 8 turns on by itself, so he's no longer turning it on. He just hears it come on and he goes to try to take care of it. I don't know how everyone else in his family, like his wife doesn't wake up, only he wakes up when that thing goes on. I'm not sure if we're just supposed to assume she's used to him doing that, so she thinks he's just doing it on his own. But he gets up, he goes to take a look at it, and he holds up like the photo of Bagul, and you kind of know this is coming. He's holding it up by a window, and he like pulls it down, and then we see Bagul in the window shot outside. He freaks out. He goes out there to try to take care of the situation. He walks outside with his bat and his flashlight. He's ready to, I don't know what he's going to beat up this like supernatural being, but he sees his son in the bushes looking like all creeped out, brings him inside, leaves him with his wife, and he's like, I'm going to go back out. I forgot something. Goes back out there, grabs his flashlight on the ground. There's like this dog who's growling. I don't know. I think I maybe missed some of the really logic behind the dog. Maybe the dog was the belonging to the old family, because we see behind Ethan Hawke is the family, and the dog's growling at them, but he doesn't realize it. He thinks he's being growled at. Eventually the dog just scurries off, and that scene kind of just advances at that point in time. We have the cops show up the following day, I think it is, and talks to the father, fills him in on, hey, these, could have had drug use involved in these, and that could have really done the heavy lifting for how these bodies got put where they were at. The father, Ethan Hawke, mentions, hey, look into this drowning one too. So he gives him full picture here. The cops kind of eventually like, look, if I'm going to do this stuff for you, you need to fill me in, because I'm not just going to like be your servant in this situation. We're going to be partners, and we're going to work together on solving this. So he says, look into the drowning. And then we have another film show up where we have the lawnmower scene. This one's probably one of the more prominent scenes in the movie. I feel like people talk about this one all the time because we have a major jump scare here. And not just visually, it's like audibly loud, where someone's mowing a lawnmower and we're just seeing the lawnmower, and then we see a person that they're mowing over, and it makes this loud noise. That it's a great scene overall for a jump scare. I'm not a big fan of jump scares because I feel like sometimes they're pretty cheap, but this movie does them more or less well. There's one or two where I'm like, I didn't need that, but I feel like they handle jump scares mostly effectively in this film. And that's a big one I would call out. The father calls this famous professor that the cop tells him about. So the cop's like, hey, we work with this professor sometimes, and he's been effective in solving some of these really weird cases we've encountered. And these are really great parts of the film, I feel like, where he's talking to the professor via video chat, and they're kind of exchanging information. And the professor tells him, hey, that logo you sent me that's in some of these crime scenes is a pagan deity reference. So it's like a Babylonian time reference that is Bagul, we find out the name there, who's an eater of children. Ethan Hawke's like, eater of children? And just enjoy the back and forth with them, because feel like they're like uncovering what's going on here. And the professor's kind of like, why are you asking this? And he's like well informed about these murders that have happened already. So they're a good combination to try to resolve what's going on here. And then the father winds up, he says, I'm going to lock up this footage. And then sure enough, he wakes up to it playing again regardless. So we have that happen. We get a bit of a jump scare with the demonic girl. So one of the girls that has been taken over by Bagul, she has this big jump scare. That one's probably, in my opinion, upon second watch at least, was more effective than the lawnmower. Maybe because I was expecting the lawnmower this time, I kind of knew that one was a big factor in the film. So the girl jumping was a big surprise for me. He doesn't seem to be able to see these dead kids. So they're like running around the house making noise. He can't really seem to see them. He just hears the noise going all over the place. We have him see the footage playing again. And then we cut to him checking the rooms of his kids and his wife. And he sees the daughter who's just kind of leaned over the edge. And when he leaves, we see that the dead girl is just there talking to the daughter. And she's just going like the shh type thing. And on the wall there is a picture of the hanging family with Bagul's picture as well. So really building that suspense at this point in time. Then we have the father lock up the house. I don't know why the house wasn't locked already. He's like locking all the doors and closing the windows and stuff. And just feel like that should have been done before doing this. I don't know what your point of like showing this necessarily was. But we have a cool morning transition where he just goes, sits on the couch with his bat, and then we just see kind of behind him the light come through the window eventually. So he just slept there overnight. Cop winds up coming to visit, and they exchange information. Cop doesn't believe him here. He's like, you need to chill. I know you've been drinking a lot and things like that. But then he talks about staying in the house. The cop's like, I would never stay in this house. So it's a little bit weird, his perspective. I don't know what entirely the cop believes or doesn't believe, but feels like he's not necessarily on the same page as the father in this specific scene. And we have the girl draw a picture out in the hallway. So the rules have always been, you can draw whatever you want in your room, but it's limited to your room. She draws a picture of Stephanie, the girl who went missing, on her tire swing in the hallway. The mother freaks out about it and brings it up. And then the girl mentions, oh, Stephanie told me to do it. And she's like, she used to live here before. So the mom's starting to put two and two together. I don't know how she wouldn't figure this out, because if all the kids are saying this in the school, how would the mom not have heard this among like just rumors or people talking, or even when the cops were there originally. She just doesn't realize the house was the crime scene. So she brings it up. She's like, why was this going on? She like freaks out on Ethan Hawke, and he mentions this was a steal of the house. It was such a good deal. We had to take it. And they have a really hardcore fight where they're yelling at each other a whole lot. He just mentions books are his legacy, and she's like, your kids are your legacy. So bit of a conflict rising with those two. And fast forward a little bit in time, we have a flashlight pop up on the father sleeping. I don't know like what this was. It's just kind of, it's there. Maybe a kid did it to him. He hears the film noise, but he doesn't see anything in his office anymore. And he's like, where's this coming from? And he sees the attic steps are now down. So he chooses to go up there again, and he sees the group of 5 dead kids just sitting there watching the film. And we see them kind of look at him. And this was a little bit silly, but we have Bagul show up on the screen, and then we have him pop in front of the camera, and Ethan Hawke like falls down from the stairs of the attic back down the ground. I don't know, like from his vantage point, maybe Bagul popped out from the side, but it felt very much like that shot was intended for a camera, not for his perspective. So I don't know how he got surprised, unless you want to say it just really came out of the side for him too. But it felt like a little bit cheesy, but it was fine, I guess. So he falls from the attic, and then he goes to the backyard, and he's like, I'm going to burn all this film. I'm done with this. So he fully goes from like investigating this and like, let's do this, let's solve this, to saying, F this, we're out. Burns all the film. His wife eventually comes out. She does wake up this time. She comes out, and she's like, what's going on? He's like, we have to leave now. She's like, all right, well, we'll figure it out. And he's like, no, now. Like, they're leaving that very second. Like, they're packing up at that point in time. So they pack up. They drive away in the night. You have him get pulled over by the cop, the kind of hateful one who was not a fan of him. I don't know if this was necessary. It just kind of felt like an extra addition to show another interaction and just kind of pad out the film. But you have him pull him over for speeding, and he asks, like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, we're leaving. He's like, were you pushed out of town? And he's like, no, I'm done with it. I'm done with the book. And he's like, wait a minute, no book? He's like, no book. He's like, all right, no ticket for you then. So because he's not going to write a book about the situation, he decides not to give him a ticket and says, like, see you later. Like, they don't leave amicably, but they're just going their separate ways now, and he's done with him. So they move back into their old house, presumably, because they hadn't sold it yet. They were still kind of like balancing, trying to sell that one. So they were paying off 2 mortgages at the time. And then we have him, he gets a few calls from the cop, and he's really just declining those. He's over it. I don't know why. He opens his computer and he sees these pictures that the professor sent him. He shoots to video chat him. I feel like he was done with it, but then he's like back in it. So he pulls open the video chat and talks to him. And then the professor mentions, yeah, Bagul lived in the images himself, and it's a gateway into his realm. And he could abduct people that are viewing the images through that gateway. And I feel like the dad tries to ask, like, if the images are destroyed, can we close that gateway? And the guy's kind of like, are we talking in real life or like in the stories? Like, he's very much like, what's going on? Like, are you not telling me something? So they don't really answer that, but we kind of get the answer of it anyway. We keep seeing him decline the cop call. Eventually he goes up into the attic and he sees the box again. The box of the Super 8 films are now in his attic, not the other house's attic. This is kind of where we were expecting the film to go. We have this other edition though in the box called Extended Cut Endings. So that's a new edition, and I don't know, like, it's kind of funny. It's in this like envelope just written Extended Cut Endings. I'm just imagining like a video of Bagul like getting out the thing and like writing it on there. Like, who the heck wrote that on there? But either way, maybe you want to say one of the kids did it, but it was really nice handwriting. Either way, long tangent there. He sees that. He finally answers the cop call, and he's talking to him and realizes, oh, these things are connected, which it felt like this was probably obvious, but he's like, oh, that family that lived in your house came from St. Louis. And the family that was in St. Louis came from like Southern California or something like that. And the family lived there. Guess where they lived? Sacramento. So it seems like every time a family moved into this house where somebody was murdered, they got Bagul's like curse, if you want to say, and then moved to another house. And then that's when all hell breaks loose. So doing the moving actually is what initiates the action that would be causing problems. So in reality, he was probably better off just staying in the house that he was in instead of going back to his old one, because in theory, Bagul wasn't going to attack until he moved away so that he could maybe expand his like territory. I don't know what we want to say there, but he moves away, and that may have been causing a problem. We find out from the footage that Stephanie did the hanging of her family, and she goes up to the camera and she does the little shh thing, and then we see all the kids showing them being the ones who killed their families and then doing the same thing. And then he's kind of like getting up, he's like figuring out what's going on, and he looks down at his drink and he realizes, oh, my drink was spiked. So he falls to the ground. His daughter ties him up, tapes his mouth shut. She's like, don't worry, Daddy, I'll make you famous again, which was, it was kind of funny or fitting for his character because that was his goal, but she was obviously killing him and recording it. So she films the family and she axes them all up. And then there's like bloody walls with all the kids in the room. And then we have the girl draw the picture of the scene that she did, like all the other kids presumably did. And Bagul grabs her, then he goes into the film with her. So she has now been taken into the film realm where Bagul's at, and her whole family's been killed. So Ethan Hawke, his wife, and son were all killed. I feel like his son kind of got screwed over here. I know upon first watch, I felt like I expected the kid, like the boy, to be the one dealing with this because he was the one creating all like the terror stuff. But upon second watch, I was like, it felt like pretty obvious it could have been the girl because she's the one that's talking to the other girl in the bedroom. So either way, picked her and she killed the family and went in there. Presumably whoever buys the house next is going to see the film and the cycle will repeat itself. I know there's a sequel to this film. I've never seen it. I can't imagine it's that great. I haven't heard anything really about it. So if you guys encourage me to take a look, I would definitely do so. But it's not one I've watched at this point in time. And we kind of just end the movie with a jump scare of Bagul popping out. I felt like that was a little bit unnecessary. As far as the pros and cons, I don't have a super long list because I feel like I talked more about the film itself. As far as the strengths, I feel like the audio team did really great here. The noise effects and things like that were really well done. The professor, one-on-ones with him were really great scenes to have. I feel like that tension built up as we uncovered what was going on. Talking to the cop was cool as well. I feel like both of those were good additions as far as people for Ethan Hawke to talk to, but the professor specifically, those ones really stuck out. As far as cons, I would say on a rewatch, some of the footage that Ethan Hawke goes through is kind of slow-paced. The movie is a little long for a horror movie, especially for like standard horror movie time limits. And I feel like the pacing at some points are a little bit slower, especially on rewatch, I would say, because you know what's going to happen, and then we trying to build suspense and nothing happens for a while. So it's a little slower paced at some spots, and it may have some issues just bouncing back and forth, not necessarily in an effective manner, I would say. Another con I would point out that you may want to say, the father is kind of dumb in what he does in some of these scenes, but I don't feel like it's as bad as maybe a lot of people would think. I think a lot of people think he probably is not the smartest guy, but compared to other movies where characters make really poor choices, I feel like his are reasonable to a certain extent in this one. Maybe going up to the attic and stuff like that by himself and doing that, that's a little bit of a stretch, but I don't think him watching some of the stuff or doing some certain things wasn't necessarily the worst choices to make because he was kind of a desperate author at that point in time. He wanted success and he wanted to uncover these truths. Maybe he should have included the cops more. I don't know. That probably wouldn't have saved him anyway. Final con I would point out, maybe it's a little bit predictable that moving from house to house is what's going to create the terror or bring it upon them. I feel like once you find out this family came from another family and there's more people that involved in this, that was a little predictable, but they still do it effectively. And as I mentioned, you weren't sure, is it going to be the boy, the girl? But overall, I think it's a pretty strong film. I enjoyed this even on rewatch, and it's one that I would definitely recommend checking out. Obviously, I've gone through some of the details here already, though, so hopefully you have taken a look at this one, but it's definitely one that I enjoyed. As far as scoring, I'm a little bit torn. I'm debating, this is definitely an above average film. I'm debating between a 7 and an 8 because I really enjoyed this one. I think it does a lot of suspense, and it's just overall really effective. And I'm a big Ethan Hawke fan, so that probably helps a lot with the story too. But honestly, I think between 7 and 8, I think because of that ending with that little jump scare BS they try to pull with Bagul popping out, it's like a fourth wall breaking thing where the only reason to do that is for the audience. Like you see the box in the attic and we zoom out and Bagul pops out and scares you one last time before the movie ends. I kind of don't like that, to be honest. So I think I'm going to take a point away for them doing that because it felt like it was a little too much. So we'll go with the 7. We'll say 7 out of 10 for this film. Enjoyed it overall. Definitely one that I would recommend watching and one that I enjoy watching. And I think the story is strong. As mentioned, I haven't seen the sequel, so if you have any thoughts either on this one or the sequel, we'd love to see your feedback down below. But those are my thoughts overall, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.